Hi everybody. I cannot see everyone in the audience there, but I think you could see me. Could you see both the screen and my face?
We see the screen.
Okay, that's fine. Just want to know how animated I should be when I'm talking to the slides. No, it's great to be here. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk a little bit about, well, it's more like an update with our flash flood work. I wish I could be there in person. I really enjoy the Global Flood Partnership meetings. It just didn't work out this time. I'm actually in Nashville this week. So greetings from Nashville, Tennessee, if anyone has ever been there. But yeah, I will use this time today to talk a little bit about flash flood anticipatory action. And I'm not sure if this has been discussed yet. What I mean by this is anticipatory action this week. But my understanding is that there are various people there that are involved in anticipatory action, maybe not necessarily for flash floods, but for floods. And myself and my team have been focusing on flash flood risk and essentially moving from or asking questions around how we can move from flash flood forecasting to flash flood warning and alerting to flash flood anticipatory action. So essentially, we have made progress with flash flood forecasting in our community. However, we have made less progress in taking action on meaningful lead times before a flash flood leads to impact. And what I mean by that is, in the humanitarian sector, we need sufficient time to do something. And I think this is something that many people understand. There is a trade-off between lead time and ability to take action. But we are making progress, and we're doing that in very close collaboration with the Red Cross, both the Red Cross, Red Crescent Climate Center, and also the National Societies of Red Cross, Red Crescent. So today I'll be giving an update about a recent visit to Ecuador, where we're working with the Ecuador government, including the INAMI, which is the Meteorological and Hydrologic Service, and also the Ecuador Red Cross. I also want to acknowledge the NASA Disasters Program, who've been funding this work for a couple of years now. And I also, I'll get to the other team members, but this is done in close collaboration with the University of Oklahoma as well. Okay, so I'm Andrew Kruczkiewicz. I think I know some of you there. Again, I wish I could be there in person and talk more about flash floods and learn from you all. But yes, very nice to be here today. And I wanted to set the stage a bit. This is Quito, high elevation city straddling the equator. This is a picture looking southeastward, and you could see the orientation of the city, going from the west, let's say the left part of the picture all the way down through towards the south. It's a sprawling, long city that is in between various mountains and also volcanoes as well. But it is high elevation. It is usually fairly, let's say, moderate in temperature. It gets a bit cold in the evenings year round. And they do have periods of intense rainfall. There's also mud flows and landslides are increasing there. But we were there specifically to support and understand more about where flash floods are happening, what forecasts are currently being used, how is risk assessed for flash floods, how are these flash floods events documented, and then what are the actions that the Red Cross or the government could take if there was a forecast, even if it wasn't specific for individual flash flood events, but just trying to understand how risk can be better integrated into forecasting and then anticipatory action systems. So this is an overview of the city. And this here is very close to the historical center of Quito. And a few things to point out here. I'm not sure if you could see my cursor here, but if you look at the black gate here, you could see some mud about not quite a meter off the ground, but you see essentially this mud residue, and it goes across the black gate. And then if you follow up towards the white wall, you could see that that mud, or let's say the residue from mud that was part of, this was actually where a flash flood from the very top of that hill there, you could see in the back where you see the furthest extent of the urban area going up the volcano. This is the end. This is about 6 kilometers from that point. This was one of the most devastating flash floods Quito has had. It happened in late January this year. Approximately 40 to 50 people died. And yes, this is where that flood ended. So I wanted to show you, it's cut many of these events, these flash floods and mud flows are coming from the volcano, and they travel an extraordinary amount of time, sometimes splitting off in different axes as well. But this was the most pronounced axis of the event, all the way down to this point. So you could see all the area that it traveled here. This is going back up to the top. So this is where the event essentially began. You also see some people here. You see the Cruz Roja Ecuatoriana. So this is the Red Cross, the Ecuador Red Cross. And then you also see the municipality government there. And we were very privileged to be taken around this part of Quito, La Gasca, to learn about where the floods, how the floods evolve, but specifically what the impact of these events looks like. This was one part of Quito, La Gasca, and then I'll show you another part of Quito, and we could have a bit of a comparison. But this is one of the most important parts of developing anticipatory action for flash floods, because we need to know what happens to the people. We need to know what happens where the water in specific events flows. And yes, this was looking at the top where it's essentially where the city meets the more wild part or more natural part of the volcano. So this is the very northern and like outward extent of the city. So here it was described how the flood event kind of came together, and you can see there's many areas of concrete here and roadway that accelerated the flow towards southward, towards lower elevations of the city center. And in this picture here, you can see the Ecuadorian government official in the orange jacket there gesturing towards a tunnel. And this tunnel is where, and it's actually in some ways designed to act as a funnel for the water. It's just the volume of the water was so high that what happened when the water flowed into this tunnel, it accelerated and catapulted against essentially the flow through that tunnel. And unfortunately, at the other side of the tunnel was this volleyball court. And at the time of the flood, this area actually did not see much rainfall at all. The flash flood started approximately at 1 kilometer up the volcano, where they had been experiencing heavy rainfall. But if anyone has been to the high mountains of the Andes, you may know that, yes, you could have very heavy rainfall not so far away and then have sunshine in other areas. So in this area here is where many of the local community members were playing volleyball, having a nice afternoon. Then all of a sudden, water at unseen, unexperienced volumes came through that tunnel. And unfortunately, this area is where approximately 15 to 20 people died because of that flood. You could see on the fence here, there is now a tribute to the people that died in the flood. And there's also various murals around the area, not only as a tribute to the people, but also to the rebuilding process. You know, this is in Ecuador, it was made known to me an activity, a community activity called La Minga, which is basically like when the community comes together and not only rebuilds from disaster, but also just supports the community. And it's not implied that any sort of payment would be received. So these are some of the key elements that I'm not going to say need to be integrated into the anticipatory action development, but it's about understanding the culture. It's about understanding what happens in the community. And yes, being here and having hosts from the community and from the local government definitely helps when you think about the historical, let's say, analysis of this event. You know, I've been reading about this event since it happened, but being there and looking at the areas, understanding where people were impacted, understanding the let's say the length, you know, of where we saw the flash flood and the timing of these events was critical for us to bring back and and tailor the models that we're using within the anticipatory action program. So we'll get a little bit more on that later. But yeah, this is one of the events, the La Gasca flash flood. If anybody is interested to looking, you could Google that as well. So this is a different part of Quito. This is Calderon, and this is in the northern part. It's actually very close to the equator, maybe just a few, like 1 or 2 kilometers from the equator in Quito. And this is a drier area. It's lower elevation. And you could see that here. You could see it's a more rural area as well. If you look at the top kind of center part of the screen, you will see an open mine. So there are many of these sorts of activities. There's also rapid development from the sprawl of the city, new apartment buildings being built, new infrastructure, and these sorts of things. But yeah, this actually, there was a flash flood here about 1 month prior to my visit in July. And this is, let's see, this is what the area looked like before the flash flood. You could see a small stream here. You could see lots of vegetation, but still kind of shrub-like and mostly dry here. And then you see the road. You could see a house on the left side with the orange paint. But this is what the community looked like before the flash flood came through. And then this is a picture in a slightly different area, but this is what happened after the flash flood occurred in July. And you can notice a few things here. You see very high levels of erosion on the hillside. You see the stream that was quite small in the other picture now is much bigger. This is also a polluted stream with runoff, because on the top of the hill to the top left of the picture, they're building very large condo complexes. So the community down here in Calderon, which is a lower income community, has been talking about how with the increased mining and with the increased development, there's more erosion, there's more questions about sanitation of the water source. And these are all increasing their, let's say, perception of risk, but also, I shouldn't say asking or requesting anticipatory action systems, but just there's more request about when are we going to see the devastating flash flood? Is this the one? Is it going to happen in the next month or years? And this was I describe as a close call. And not only me, the community would describe this as a close call. And very fortunately, there was no fatalities here, but you could see this changes the dynamics of the area. And yes, there is high levels of concern, not only from Red Cross, the government, but from the community. And they're asking questions like, should we stay here if this continues? And what's that hillside to the right going to look like the next time we have a flash flood or we have intense rainfall? But again, like, what actions can we take? This was the question that we kept coming back to. In La Gasca, you could, if you remember the pictures before, it was a much more built up area. You know, it was on the edge of the more natural area of the volcano, but still it's a very high density area. And down here is much different, but you still have people living here. And this led us to have a more, let's say, structured discussion around what actions can we take, what lead time do we need to take those actions, and then what type of forecast and or risk products can be useful in developing the anticipatory action system. So in Calderon, we were brought to this area, which was on the other side of the village. And again, here you see people on the bottom left here, the person with the mask, that is Sabina. She is the lead Red Cross disaster manager, who is our main tour guide. And you see some of the other members of the risk secretariat is the person in the blue striped orange jacket there. So Ecuador does have a government department called the risk secretariat that deals with risk and in some ways early warning, also in collaboration with INAMI. But the local government leader here, which is in the blue vest, he was telling us that, well, we actually, after that flood, we cleaned out this canal drainage system. And then we started talking about, well, how long did that take? You know, it's not, we didn't ask questions about what might you do if you receive warning. It was very important to say, listen, like, this is an action you already took. Yes, Perhaps it was taken after the flash flood. But this is something that could be done in various parts of the city. How long did it take? How many people are needed to do this? What equipment? And then essentially, what type of how much does it cost? What type of resources do we need on a local scale to get this done? So essentially, they said it takes about 7 to 10 days to clean out these drainage canals. That's the way it usually works. And that led to discussions around, well, yeah, fine, if that's what it takes when there is not increased risk of a flash flood in the coming days, that's fine. But if there is that increased risk, can that time be sped up? Can we use the assessment of deviation from baseline risk, for a flash flood to say, here's a little bit of extra funds to get more people to clean this out? Does that work in this context? So it's a lot of our work here was not assuming that action can be taken, asking questions about what action has been taken, and then being more pragmatic about how many people are needed, what are the human resources, what are the costs, and also what comes up many times is the political questions around, well, if we're prioritizing one of these drainage canals in this community, we're essentially deprioritizing other communities. So do we have confidence in our modeling where we could actually say, listen, the community over to the east, you don't have zero risk for a flash flood, but this is about prioritizing. And for this, at this time, we only have funding for maybe 5 canal/draining systems to clean out, and you didn't make the cut. There's a lot of discussion about that. How can the Red Cross, what is the responsibility of the Red Cross to communicate those sorts of messages, not only about prioritizing and making and being present in that prioritization and being there, but also when there are questions about deprioritization, because as we know, it does not mean there is zero risk. How does the Red Cross and how does the government navigate that? And that is a key element of anticipatory action in general, not just in this context, but it is something that is forgotten quite often. We think about, we need a forecast, we need action, we need to tap into financial resources to make it happen. But the responsibility around deprioritization is real. And that's something that we see in the humanitarian community when we're moving towards scaling this sort of work up. So let's see, setting up the case study, given the background, it took a little bit longer than I thought, but I do think it's important. But now I just wanted to show a couple slides about the work we're doing. This is our Global Flash Flood Early Warning and Anticipatory Action Program. So again, this is funded by the NASA Disasters Program. It's also in collaboration with GEO. University of Oklahoma and the Red Cross are key partners, along with INAMI. On the left is some of the simulation of flash flood events. And this modeling is done to assess, let's say, accuracy of not just forecasting, let's say, intense rainfall or unit stream flow here, but then overlaying historical flash flood events to get a better sense of, the prioritization of activities throughout Ecuador, but also looking into this deprioritization element. And why are we doing this? On the right, this is a snapshot of the forecast-based action by the DREF. So what that means is that IFRC, so the International Federation of Red Cross, is developing these anticipatory action systems that are linked to financing in different parts of the world. We've done this for flood, riverine flood, drought, cyclones, heat wave, cold waves, ZUD in Mongolia, but we have not done this for flash floods. I'll skip through this. This is just showing the actual document. This is an early action protocol. What goes in the early action protocol and the example here, this was when we designed the trigger model based on a ZUD risk map that is produced a few times a year. And when you see ZUD in Mongolia, you see very cold, windy, dry conditions that lead to livestock death and other factors. So this is one example of developing this early action protocol. There is a lot that goes into it. And this is what we're working on now in Ecuador for flash floods. And this is the team. So I wanted to give a shout out to the team here. Berto Vergara is the co-PI in Oklahoma that is leading the modeling component. And this is yeah, just a team of many students and other data scientists that have been working with us. On the bottom left, we do have a paper. We have a couple of papers I wanted to go through, but I believe I'm running out of time. But this one here on the left, I think would be specifically of interest to the group because, yeah, we were faced with the challenge of Ecuador having lots of historical flood data, but there was not, well, historically, there were no standard operating procedures for disaggregating flood type in the historical record. And some people might say, well, what does it matter? Like, do we really need to go into definitions of riverine flood and flash flood? Essentially, those are the two types in Ecuador. And it does matter because the impact profile is different based on those types of floods. Therefore, the anticipatory actions could be substantively different depending on what part of Ecuador and depending on what type of, what subtype of flood we're talking about. So if you're interested in our methodology, you could check out that paper. And we also have a couple other papers that are coming out using Google Street View to assess street level flash flood vulnerability. This is a paper that came out in one of the IEEE journals. And let's see, we also have a paper coming out. Oh, we also have a paper out on using VGI from Waze, looking at reporting of flash floods. This is a case study in Hurricane Harvey, but this is something that we're also interested in expanding as well. If there are people, I don't know if anyone is interested in the VGI, but for flash floods, there is some potential there, and that's what we show here. So yeah, I think I'll leave it there. There was a couple other things I wanted to show, but yeah, I think maybe there's a couple minutes for questions, but I'll leave it here on these images of the flash flood in Ecuador. So thank you all very much. And yes, definitely reach out if you have any questions on flash floods, anticipatory action, these sorts of things. Again, I wish I was there to talk to you all, and looking forward to seeing you all in person soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Have you any questions for Andrew?
Oh, I'm sorry, I can't really hear. It's very muffled.
Can you hear me better now?
I could hear you better. It's still slightly muffled though, but I can hear you better.
Okay, there's nothing in my phone for my accent. I'm asking the audience if there are any questions. So
okay.
Don't be shy. So hold on, I'm coming to you. Andrew, can you hear me?
I think so. That sounds like it might be Guy, but I could be wrong.
Great presentation, very nice. One quick question: you showed one case study. How many do you have, or do you just have that case study to focus on with the validation, etc.?
Yes. No, we have. So I'm trying to think of the best way to answer this. So our case studies for the anticipatory action are focused on these two events, La Gasca and Calderon. In terms of the validation, so I showed that one brief. I didn't want to make this presentation about the validation, honestly, because I feel like there's a lot of discussion about anticipatory action, and I wanted to go through the let's say, quantitative elements of what it takes to develop the anticipatory action, because it really comes down to the people. You know, how do we understand the impact to the people? So that's why I focused on that. But yeah, the modeling side, we have various, I guess we could call them case studies, and that's based on one of the first papers that I showed here. Yeah, it's based on understanding the subtypes of floods, and even what happened through that research is thinking more about the subtypes of flash floods. You know, the degree to which a flash flood is, let's say, more of a mud flow, or questions around how these two events combined, and just describing through the impact, describing subtypes of flash floods as well. But yeah, so we have various, let's say, case studies where we looked at specific flash flood events. Well, actually, I would say we looked at specific intense rainfall events, because many times what we saw were various flash floods in the same day, in the same area. So yeah, the one I showed before was near Esmeraldas, which is in the northwest part of Ecuador. And yes, what we found is that the EF5 model, so this is the University of Oklahoma model, it's kind of the back end, a lot of the National Weather Service work as well. performed fairly well in that part of in that part of Ecuador. However, that part of Ecuador wasn't the top priority for the Ecuador Red Cross. And it's not because there is no need or no risk, but where they're seeing flash floods in places that haven't seen them before is really the central Andes area around Quito. So it brings back the questions like, well, even if our model performs well in one part of Ecuador, where is the risk increasing and evolving? And where is the need greatest for not only the forecasting, but specifically for the anticipatory action work? And that's really in and around Quito. So that's why we focus there. But yeah, this is one of the realities around working at the interface with the humanitarian sector and trying to develop standard operating procedures. Priorities change. You know, the government has changed a few times since we started working in Ecuador, and then priorities change, and you have to pivot. You know, so yeah, I guess I'll shout thanks also to NASA and the disasters program for being very supportive of that, because yeah, many times it's out of your hands. The government changes the priorities. You have to go with it if you want any chance of what your work being sustainable.